All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us at our special talk, Geography and Environment lecture series. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. This is Professor David Beilman. He is professor and chair of the Department of Geography and Environment at UH Mānoa. Dr. Beilman earned his PhD from UCLA and has conducted research around the world, focusing mostly on biogeography, terrestrial ecosystems, climate change, and island and wetland environments. So today he'll be sharing his talk on Antarctica and the surprising ways its ecosystems are changing in a warming world. I'd also note that Professor Beilman was a Marie Curie International Fellow at Queen's University in Belfast, Ireland. So we are honored to have him with us. Please join me in welcoming Professor Beilman.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me here out at Leeward Community College. It's great to be here. Especially in the Koala room. If you guys invite me back, I'll tell you all about the research we've been doing on top of koala for the last 20 years. I'm also very interested in all things Pacific and work around the Hawaiian Islands as well. But today I wanted to tell you a little bit about Antarctica. So this is one of my favorite projects. So this is kind of a trip abroad for us, and we'll talk a little bit about cold region environments. And it sounds like Antarctica is kind of a long way away, right? You know, all the way down at the bottom of the Earth. But this is surprisingly connected with the rest of planet Earth through biogeography and global carbon cycling, as I'll show you here in a moment. So how do we want to do questions? Do we want to do questions anytime or save them? Do you have a preference?
Right now we're thinking that we'll have a question-answer period towards the end.
Towards the end, okay, great, yeah. If anybody's got like a burning question, you can feel free to interrupt me, but there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So one quick shout out here is to all of the support for this project. So there's a few symbols and a whole bunch of names. This is borne out by a lot of help from a lot of people. This is National Science Foundation supported research, so we're extremely fortunate to have a National Science Foundation in this country. It's been changing a lot recently. But they support all of that research down in Antarctica. And so the ship folks and all of the people behind the scenes who help with getting us to these study locations, we couldn't do it without them. Okay, right. One thing I wanted to kind of lay a foundation for today is this idea of the global carbon cycle. So if we take all of the operations of planet Earth and kind of distill them down to one element at a time, right? You know, elements on the periodic table of elements. We can consider all of the planet just in terms of carbon. And so this is a cartoon version of studying that carbon cycle. So this is following a single element all around the different places that it can go on planet Earth. And the boxes here, there's a few boxes in this diagram. There's one up here for the atmosphere. There's some boxes out here in the ocean, and there's some boxes here on land. These we call pools, and they're different sizes in terms of how much carbon they contain. So a takeaway message here is that when we look up at the atmosphere, we've got about 829 big units of carbon. These are gigatons or other types of way of counting it up. They're just big units of carbon. And there's about 800 or so in the atmosphere. And in the ocean, there's about 900, similar amount in the surface ocean. A whole lot down in the deep ocean. Oh, I lost my pointer already. Down here in the deep ocean. And here on land, we've got vegetation, living and dead plants that come out to be about 500 big units. And the point here is that these are all kind of similar in size. And the way that those pools interact with each other are through fluxes, right? So you can exchange carbon between the ocean and the atmosphere, and it can go from the atmosphere to the ocean, photosynthesis with phytoplankton. And you can also have connections between the atmosphere and the land through photosynthesis with plants and respiration of soils, right? Exchanges between the two. That's what the arrows are. But what's really kind of something to point out here, try my pointer again, No, it doesn't like me. The pointer would point to this number here that's like 1,500 to almost 2,500 of those big units. And that's what's below ground in soils. And the point here is that there's way more carbon below ground in soils than there is even in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is where we think about carbon because CO2, methane, things that are involved in climate change, right? We're always interested to know what's going on up here in the atmosphere. There's way more carbon below ground in soils than there is upstairs in the atmosphere. So we kind of want to keep a track on these arrows then, right? So in terms of how they're moving back and forth. It's too far away to see the numbers, but take my word for it. This number here is 2.3, this one is 2.6. That's about 5 units that are going down out of the atmosphere into land and into the ocean. That's how much uptake of carbon is happening by those environments, right? Plankton and trees and shrubs and grasses and mosses and things like that. And this arrow here, where's my arrow? This arrow here is what we're doing to the atmosphere, and that is anthropogenic emissions of carbon. And the number there, it's too small to see, but it's 8. So there's an inherent imbalance between this 2.5 plus 2.5 equals 5, and the 8 that's going up means that there's more carbon going up into the atmosphere than there is coming down. And that's why we have increasing CO2, and we're concerned about things like climate change as driven by CO2 and methane and things of that nature. There's an inherent imbalance in the way that we've been burning fossil fuels, right, in terms of how much carbon is going into the atmosphere. But don't forget, before I leave this confusing diagram behind, that these arrows are really important because this is what the natural environment has been doing for us in terms of how much carbon is accumulating upstairs in the atmosphere. If it wasn't for this 2.5 and this 2.5, we'd have even more carbon accumulating in the atmosphere. So thank you, phytoplankton. Thank you, plants. We want to keep an eye on those processes to make sure that they continue to operate because they've been doing us a huge favor, actually, over the last 150 years by taking up half, right, of our emissions has been offset by the operations of plants and phytoplankton. So yeah. So this is the way that warming is played out around planet Earth. And you guys probably know this from your introductory classes, maybe in geography, I hope. But this is a spatialization of how the last 100 years or so have played out in terms of the warming of planet Earth. And you know, planet Earth has gotten warmer, we know that. We just ask thermometers how warm the air is, and the air's gotten warmer. That's not really under any kind of debate. But in terms of why is under debate, and these spatial patterns are really important in terms of where. As good geographers, we're always got a sense of where, right? Sense of place in terms of understanding these processes. And polar amplification is a thing. So in the Arctic, there's some redder colors that show that the Arctic has been warming faster than the global average. And also the Antarctic. There's less data in general because it's not very populated down in Antarctica. But this is my intriguing little red blob down here that's always motivated me. And this shows that this part of Antarctica, this kind of like almost northernmost part of Antarctica where it's kind of the warmest, is one of these sites of fastest warming on planet Earth, much faster than the global average. So this is a place to think about in terms of implications, right? What are the carbon cycle implications for that warming? And if we go to a place where it's really rapidly warming, we might see a really robust response and understand what's to come in other places. So greening Antarctica, I haven't shown you any green pictures yet, but this is come up in the literature. So just a couple of papers in the last couple of years, you know, documenting from satellites that the areas of green cover have expanded in Antarctica, especially in the peninsula region where that red blob was. And like any good scientific argument, there's a counter-argument and there's a debate going on in the literature right now in terms of just how much warmer and how much greener. This is all very healthy debate. But for me, what it says is that there's something going on down here, and we should probably keep an eye on those plants and see what they're up to in terms of that carbon cycle behavior, maybe over long time periods to understand what's going on. So this is what our environment looks like, and it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite parts of the whole world, and it's icy, and it's oceany, and it's rocky, and it's coastal. and it's wonderful. It's also definitely getting greener. So these areas of green are expanding as the ice is melting, right? The glaciers in Antarctica are receding and being replaced with land, and the land is being replaced with green vegetation over time. So we know that's happening, and this picture kind of speaks to that, right? There's a lot of green that's expanding. You get a sense for that in this photograph. So our question relates to how the ecosystem is responding. So if Antarctica is greening, and we can see that by satellite, what's going on kind of at the plant level? Are there carbon cycle implications for that greening? And importantly, what are the limits? And are there any kind of constraints on how that might play out? So we're going to get a little bit quantitative with how we approach this. One thing I'm just advertising here, I'm not going to tell you about all this stuff, but if you want to ask me afterwards, we also took a UAV or drone team with us. And what we did is we took a typical, just off-the-shelf, cheap drone, buy them at Best Buy. This happens to be a Mavic 2 Pro. It's like 5 years old now or something like that. But we attached a couple of extra cameras to the front and back of it. So in addition to taking pictures, with the camera, we also looked at near-infrared wavelengths of vegetation, which really helps see the vegetation. You can see the green a lot better in the near-infrared that's backscattered back to that sensor. And we also attached this camera, which measures thermal infrared imagery. It tells you how warm that surface was. So we use this to map out vegetation on a local scale. These are 6 different sites that we visited. This is a mosaic of multiple images that we flew at that site. But we also have information on the near-infrared imagery and calculated something called the vegetation differential index. And we also measured the heat at the surface. And we asked this basic question, is greening resulting in a local feedback and creating warmer conditions as plants go from light-colored rocks to dark-colored plants? I'll give you a whole talk on this. I'm not going to talk about this today, but this is something fun that we've been thinking about, and we got a paper in progress right now discussing the drone work. Right? By the way, the drone costs, I don't know, $1,500 bucks. What do you pay for a drone? $1,000 or something like that. The infrared camera on the front was another $500 bucks, pretty cheap. But the near infrared, or rather the thermal infrared camera on the back was about $12,000. And so what we did is literally we Velcroed it to the back of the drone. And we were really concerned about the payload, right? You guys, I'm sure some of you guys fly drone. So we just Velcroed this thing on the back and sent this, $10,000 piece of equipment into the sky. This cheap drone was magnificent, just never got bogged down, flew no problem with 2 extra payloads. Okay, we are here studying these green areas of Antarctica. If Antarctica is greening, these are the areas that are getting green. And so this is a video I'm going to show you here of us studying these sites. And one thing that we do is we look at the plants and we look at the waters and we try to understand what's going on at the surface. But we also take cores, and what we're doing here is we're drilling down into the permanently frozen ground. It's called permafrost, and we're going to raise a sediment core from this site. And that allows us to, first of all, know how old this site is, but also have a record of all of those changes over time as this has accumulated these dead plants that don't go anywhere, right? They just kind of freeze in situ and create these deep sedimentary deposits, basically, of these green organic matter environments. And so if we core one of them, that's great because we get a sense of what's going on at this one place. But if we can also establish a network of these sites across the peninsula region, we can put that together and get kind of a widened view and see how this is playing out across the entire region. Like I said, this region is pretty nice, and those of us from island environments will appreciate this, right? It's just a network of small islands off the coast. Really appeals to our sense of island aloha. So one basic question that we asked were just how old are these ecosystems? When did they start? And it turns out they're fairly old. And when we take a core, we can ask a simple question, when did it start to grow and when did it start to get green? So we take a sample from the base of that core, we can radiocarbon date it and just ask it how old it is, and we get a plot like this. And this is showing, this is a map Wish my pointer worked, but this is a map that shows the peninsula region. And these are all the sites that are in that other panel. These are all the sites that have been studied by us in black and by other teams in the past. We've got around pretty good at this point, right? We've got a nice kind of look at how things have played out over this entire peninsula region. And this is, several hundred kilometers in terms of the height of this particular peninsula. And the panel here on the right-hand side, is showing the ages of those ecosystems. So this is an ecosystem age distribution by latitude. So up at the top, around 61 degrees south, that's up on these Antarctic, subantarctic islands. Some of those ecosystems are really old, 6,000 years, 5,000 years. But as we get down to the very southernmost part, they get younger. And we had thought, here's our first surprise, we had thought that it would be this nice pattern of just getting younger and younger and younger, because as you know, the glaciers melt, it takes time for this stuff to happen, and you're gonna get greening where it's warmer first, right? But then when we went out and actually studied the place, and all these black dots and dark green dots that my team of colleagues were able to go and collect from, there's a bunch of old sites in this kind of central area, which was a big surprise to us, and suggests that maybe there was glacial refugia in here, places where plants kind of rode out the last ice period and then just kind of came back to life rather than having to march all the way back down again. But one site I wanted to take us on a little trip to here in particular is this one. This is this oldest site from the central part of the peninsula, and it's attractive to us to study in more detail because it's old. This is a 4,000-year-old site, whereas most of these have really just started up in the last 100 years as part of recent greening, right? This is a really old site and worthy of our time. And it's here kind of in this central part of the peninsula region. So another video, right? This is the benefit of having a drone team with you, is you get all these great videos. So this is our study site at a place called Cape Tuxen. And it is not only the oldest site, as we discovered, by getting the age at the bottom of that area, but it's also really big and continuously green. It's just a fantastic, just beautiful part of the peninsula. And striking in that it's kind of in this little pocket behind these large cliff faces from the mountains that rise up into the continental peninsula behind us. This is kind of on the coastal side of it. And you can get a sense for all the seabirds and all the sea life. If you go down to the ocean level, there's seals, elephant seals, all kinds of penguins, all the things you would expect in terms of sea life around this area. This is one of the highest elevation areas where we get green in the peninsula. So between it being the highest, the oldest, and the biggest, this was kind of a special place, right? Probably here first in terms of how this area developed. So we were lucky enough to have support to go there, and we took our ship. This is the research vessel here in the background. And we get off of the research vessel and jump into rubber dinghies, right? Jump into Zodiacs and go to shore and then hike all the way up to this site. And this is the profile that we can see here. This is the deepest of all of these kind of mossy accretions that occur on the peninsula. And this sucker is deep. So this is like, on the order of 2 or 3 meters in depth, whereas other places are more like 50 or 60 centimeters. So very exciting for us to take a small core, right? We just stand on the surface and take like a little core, comes out about that big, pretty passive process. We take a clump of moss and put it back on top and you don't even know that we were there. It's a pretty benign way to do this kind of research. But we end up with a sediment profile. You can see it here, switch sides on you. This is going between 0 and 200 centimeters. So this particular profile was 2 meters deep, about the height of the ceiling. And over time, we take radiocarbon dates to know how old it is and can constrain how long it took for that much frozen material, frozen plant material to accrete. And these radiocarbon dates, take my word for it, I do this a lot for a living in terms of building these profiles. This is beautiful radiocarbon dates. It's a really well-behaved system. Kind of came together in a really nice way, no surprises, don't have to make any extra assumptions. What is this made out of? This is made out of mosses. So there's only 2 vascular plant species on the entire continental Antarctic Peninsula. The entire continent only has 2 vascular plant species. One is a grass, And one is this weird pillwort kind of small flowering plant. It makes flowers, it's like grows in little tufts about that big, and flowers come up about that big. But the rest of all of this green is lower plants. It's lichens and it's mosses and it's algae that are responsible for the green and also for the productivity in these areas. This is 2 meters of frozen moss, man. It's just a bunch of frozen moss. And it's accumulated one frozen moss growth after another over 4,000 years in this sedimentary sequence. So we drill it, take a little core out of it, and we ask it some basic questions. We asked it, how much carbon do you have? So this is expressed as a rate. So this is counting up the amount of organic carbon, which we do by firing it in an oven at 550 degrees Celsius, get the organic matter content, divide that by half, and we've got carbon. This is the amount of carbon expressed over time as a rate, right? And how the amount of carbon has accumulated over time expressed as a rate. And that rate is of interest because this is kind of like frozen moss. It doesn't really decompose that much in the Antarctic Peninsula. It's very cold. Summers are super short. There's a limited number of microbial biodiversity that occurs there. This is a place where decomposition certainly occurs, but it's more muted and arrested than in other places. So this is the rate at which that carbon has been accumulating. It's kind of like plant growth, right? It's the rate at which those plants were growing over time, reconstructed over 4,000 years. And so we see this pattern. It's kind of jumpy, and we see some interesting peaks that we might want to know about in terms of the controls on that. Is that something we can learn from in terms of future greening? But you can see it's kind of like sliding down. It was faster in the past, and it kind of has gotten slower over time, and seems to be picking up again here in the last few centuries. We make another set of measurements on some other chemical attributes of this organic matter. This is oxygen isotope values. I won't get you guys too bored with isotope values, but I could talk for days about isotopes. This is oxygen isotope values in the leaf cellulose, and this is the leaf tissue carbon isotopes. They're just other indicators of how much water was available in terms of the oxygen and how these plants were growing in terms of photosynthetic activity plus water availability for the plants themselves. But what's interesting for us to see just at this scale, right, is that there's similarities between the productivity of those plants in the past and what these environmental indicators are showing. We want to compare that to something interesting in terms of what's controlling all of this. So one really important data set is ice core records from this region. And they've reconstructed temperature anomalies from those ice core records. So we kind of owe it to ourselves to say, okay, well, if this is what the temperature looks like it has evolved like in the region, is there a positive or negative or any kind of relationship with our plant productivity proxy and what we want to learn about how plants grow? And you can see there's some similarities, right? Back here it was warmer several thousand years ago. It kind of got cooler, and now in recent decades it's kind of peaking up again. Yeah. Same kind of pattern here, same kind of pattern here. And just visually, we see that there's a coincidence that gets our chin scratching in terms of what's really going on in terms of process. So to do a better job of this, we could compare this century by century, right? Take little slices of this and compare it one time slice at a time in terms of how the temperature might be affecting the carbon sequestration, the carbon balance at these sites. So that's, of course, what we did. And we chopped up the core into century or 100-year long sections and just asked that question, right? Is there a relationship? And by doing a simple analysis, just by putting one against the other in a linear regression, right? If you guys have been taking statistics, this is something you might have even learned in high school. If you want to compare one variable to another, you can chuck it into a linear regression and see how it fits in the most simple of relationships, a linear relationship. And this really simple, straightforward analysis, there's a line and it fits that line and there's a positive relationship there. But we get two really interesting things out of a linear regression, right, statistics fans? We get a slope, which is 10 in this case. So for every increase in temperature, we're getting a 10-unit increase in that carbon rate. hey, that's a useful number, right? That's something that we can maybe apply and think about how this might respond in the future. This is going back into the past, over thousands of years, long-term observation. The other thing we get is an intercept. So this thing intercepts at 0. This is a temperature anomaly, right, compared to a certain time period. In this case, it happens to be 1960 to 1990. But we have an intercept value of about 20. And that 20 grams carbon per meter square per year actually fits with the way that other sites are showing their carbon sequestration rates. So it gives us like a warm heart in terms of knowing that we're on the right track in terms of understanding this. So if we do a simple calculation, right, owe it to ourselves to kind of pencil this out. If we have a relationship between temperature and carbon accumulation, how the plants are growing and creating that organic carbon, how does it apply versus temperature? So we get this number that we can get from the satellite folks who have been noticing the greening. And Roland et al., these are colleagues of mine from the UK, suggest that between 86 and 2020, last 40 years or so, we've got about 12,000 square kilometers of green area today. If we have, that's like from a satellite, right? So based on the pictures from the drone images, not all of that area is green, so we can do a better job of estimating how much green we actually have, thanks to our drone surveys. And it looks like, half, maybe 60% of that area is actually green versus rock. So we can bring that number down to about 7,000 square kilometers. And we can just multiply that through by our rate and the sensitivity of that rate. So if our standardized period here between 1990 and 1960 is about 20 grams carbon per meter square per year, 20 units, then as we add a centigrade temperature of warming, we might expect something like an increase in the rate between 27 and 35 grams per square meter per year. Ditto with a +2 degrees Celsius warming within that range of inference from our linear regression. If we multiply it through by the area, we're talking about 150, possibly going all the way up to 300 extra milligrams of carbon per year as a result of that change in response to temperature warming. That's what the past tells us we might be looking to in terms of future warming potential, right? Extra couple of degrees down on the peninsula is going to boost those plants' growth rate and make for more carbon and for more mosses frozen together at the surface. For some context, if any of you are studying oceans, the benthic marine carbon sink in places like those wide, shallow seas on the edges of the peninsula, they sequester carbon at a rate of about 0.7 grams carbon per meter square per year. So if the mosses are doing 20, the marine environment in the shelflands is doing about 1-ish. So about 20 times faster on land. Land tends to be flashy and really responsive. Certainly there's a lot of sea out there that's a much larger area. So when you multiply that through, you get some very large numbers. But it kind of helps to illustrate just how punchy and how flashy and how important the terrestrial stuff is to even be anywhere in the same ballpark as what's going on in the ocean. So what about this original question of limits, right? I'm trying to interested in what might be controlling that plant growth. It probably looks like it's going to increase as it gets warmer, but what are, what's the color in that? What might be those ecological limitations that are inherent in all biological systems? Where might that come from? One thing we did when we were down in Antarctica last time is we stuck a time-lapse camera on one of our study sites. So this is just a bunch of clinging green moss on the side of a rocky shoreline. And we just put a camera out there because we were off doing other things on the ship, and we let it sit there for about a month. And so this is just kind of gives you a sense of what was going on hour to hour and day to day in terms of that site. This particular year was a warm one. But look at all that snow, right? I mean, this thing is experiencing a lot of environmental variability. There's sunny days, there's sunny afternoons, there's cloud conditions, there's snow, there's melting snow. There's just a lot going on here on what was really one of the more boring summers in the last 20 or 30 years since people have been down there with the US Antarctic program. It's really showing us that there's a lot going on here and that there's probably a lot of environmental control on what those plants might be able to do. And one important thing is how they get wet and how they dry out. So these guys are called poikilohydric, meaning when they get wet, they just start growing. And when they dry out, they stop. And as soon as they get wet again, they start growing again. So they can be extremely sensitive to whether these environments are wet and whether these environments are dry. Maybe they're only photosynthesizing for an hour every day after that last rain or snow came. And then it gets too dry for them to continue to photosynthesize. Might be plenty warm, but if it's not plenty wet, there's no growth. Right? So perhaps an inherent limitation might come from the future of how wet this environment is. You can get a sense that this is like kind of maritime, right? This is like kind of wet here. Lots of rain, lots of fog, snow. This is a relatively wet environment. We're really wondering how that's going to play out in the future in terms of how dry it is. So this paper was just published last month, actually, and it's showing how evaporatively affected our plants are. And I won't bore you with the details of it, but this is just another set of isotopic data. Here, this is oxygen here on the bottom left, on the bottom right, and this is hydrogen on this side. And rain and snow, as it falls out of the sky, it turns out is really well behaved when it comes to oxygen and hydrogen isotopes. And it like falls on a line. So all the gray dots here are the rain and the snow that have been measured down on the peninsula every month for many years. And it's a line, right? I mean, it's like there's a relationship between these two things. When we went out and collected our surface water, puddles, snow, rain when it happened, falls on the line. But when we collected the waters out of the plants, you start to see that it falls off of the line. And this is because of evaporation. And this kind of blew our minds a little bit because it's not really supposed to happen in that maritime environment. It's supposed to be humid, it's supposed to be raining and snowing all the time. All of that plant water should kind of been closer to this line, and previous studies have always had it on that line. Our summer when we were out there playing around in the peninsula, it was warm, but it wasn't record-setting warm. But we have this really high enrichment signal that came out of that. Super interesting. Suggests that maybe in the future, as things continue to warm up and dry out, that we might end up with this limitation in terms of water availability, even though plants love it when it's warm. So like a good geographer, right? Good geographers, all of us, we decided to look for patterns, spatial patterns. And never mind this panel on the left, I'll tell you about that another time. You can ask me a question at the end. But this is a oxygen isotope, oxygen chemistry relationship between the value of the oxygen in the water and the leaves and where this sits on the landscape. And this is how sloped that place was relative to looking north, right, towards the equator where it's hot. And there's a nice positive relationship then between north exposedness and this delta 18O value. So place matters, and these north-facing slopes are drying out more quickly than south-facing slopes, and the data bears that out. If we have then an oxygen 18 record through time, yeah, going down through the core, we can ask how this has changed over time from a single site. One other fun last step that we're going to take next is to start thinking about ancient DNA at these sites. These are kind of perfect in terms of being frozen and kind of cold, and they're kind of like built-in coolers for these types of molecules. So ancient DNA is a up-and-coming technique. It's getting cheaper all the time. And so we're going to start asking these cores and these sites questions about how the plants have evolved over time and how the microbes have changed over time. So this is just a recent gel that was run by colleagues of mine here in Hawaii at Mānoa to try to explore how these sites might be usable in terms of ancient DNA. And that's all I got for you guys. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, we can have them now. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, in all this research, how is that gonna, do we need to prepare for the warming of Antarctica, and is that a sign of anything to come?
Yeah, so we don't live in Antarctica. Antarctica is a bunch of penguins, right? So if we're going to think about people, never mind how much I love the penguins, this is an area that's warming faster than the global average. And so processes that we can understand there are kind of getting a jump on how those processes might play out in other places as the world continues to warm. So our researchers at University of Hawaiʻi, Mānoa, and across the state have shown that Hawaii is warming faster than the average as well. So we're not out of this bullseye at all. This high latitude stuff is very much warming very quickly. But our islands, Hawaii, is warming faster than the average globally as well. So we think about, this is a very different kind of environment in terms of the temperatures, but it's still plants and it's still soils and it's still animals and it's still a response in the system that we can anticipate and get a sense for as it changes in other places as well. One thing that connects Antarctica with Hawaii, of course, is sea level rise. So oceans, sea level rise is happening all over the world, right? We know that here. You guys have probably even seen in your lifetimes changes in your favorite beaches around here. This is something that we know kind of inherently in Hawaii. Global sea level is coming up, and that's affecting how this ice, it's a great picture to end with in that way, is that all these glaciers that are kind of spilling out into the ocean, as that ocean level rises in Antarctica, it's helping to kind of unhinge those glaciers on one side and accelerating the creation of icebergs, which starts to make these mountain glaciers flow more quickly. So we're all kind of tied together, right? When it comes to things like not only atmospheric temperature, changes in rainfall, but also sea level rise is something that connects this place to our place. Thanks for that question. Yes, sir.
In your opinion, do you think that Antarctica would ever be able to be livable the way Alaska is?
It's interesting in Antarctica, this part of Antarctica is already livable. There are research bases up and down the peninsula. There's all kinds of different countries that are involved in research down there. There's this thing called the Antarctic Treaty that's about to expire in its current form. It's going to have to be re-agreed upon and rewritten. But Antarctica today is set aside for research and for non-military activity. So military activity is not allowed down on the peninsula. Yet many nation states, not ours yet, but many nation states run their scientific operations with military infrastructure, right? A lot of these places are served by military boats and stuff like that. There's more and more people down here all the time. No one's really living down in Antarctica in terms of residing there year-round except for the scientists. But tourism is huge down there right now. Like there's more and more people that are visiting the ice all the time with more and more tourism. And they're going to these places that are easiest to get to. And they happen to be these really fragile environments, right? Where, I don't even like going there every year because they're so fragile. I want to get samples and then leave it alone again because it's that way. But there's big changes coming for Antarctica. I don't know about, I hope we don't get to the point where we've got cities and resource extraction going on down there. But this is something that everyone thinks about, right? There's definitely resources down there on the ice. It's a big old continent underneath all that ice. It's full of resources that many nation states are interested in. China, Russia, all have an eye on Antarctica. It's kind of like geopolitical frontier. Thanks for that. Yeah?
So in a way, then it could adversely be affected by colonialism and neocolonialism later, as it becomes more inhabited.
Yeah, it's interesting because the activities there are definitely serving science today. But how that plays out in the future will be interesting. And if we can get together as humankind and continue with that, I hope so. But we'll see how it goes. There's definitely a lot of interest in what's going on in the ice right now, put it that way. Yes, ma'am.
I teach hospitality and tourism, and interestingly enough, my colleague here will be going in a few months to Antarctica.
Yeah.
And
congratulations.
Guilty.
All right, well, go anywhere and you kind of feel guilty, right? Yeah.
you mentioned it being fragile. What
Yes.
can we as tourists that visit there do or not do to harm the environment?
Yeah, good question. So just be mindful, you know. So it's the tour guide operators, they're only allowed to go to certain places. And it's typically a situation where you get off of the cruise ship and you get on the boat and you go to one spot and you look at some penguins and you get back on the boat and go back to the ship. And that is kind of the right way to do it. You get an incredible experience, right? Just being there and being in that environment will be unforgettable. You'll love it. But just, you know, watch where you're walking. This is like, you know, like in the desert, we get these biological crusts that form, and sometimes you don't really know what you're stepping on. And even if it looks like a bunch of bare ground, it probably isn't in these areas that are really commonly kind of lower plants and fungi and these kind of biological crusts that form. So yeah, just be mindful, stay in small areas, definitely enjoy it. Are you going to the peninsula region or are you going somewhere else? Yeah, are you gonna fly all the way down or are you? Yeah. Yeah. So the Drake, just mentioned the Drake. Drake's Passage is one of the roughest seas in the world. And the Antarctic circumpolar current, like nowhere else in the world, it just rips around uninhibited around the Antarctic continent. In the Arctic, there's a bunch of land in the way. And the Arctic Ocean is at the pole, right? It's a big old ocean up there. Whereas Antarctica is big old landmass, but the way that circumpolar current, it just goes unimpeded around the continent. And when it really starts to cook, it just kind of builds on itself and builds on itself. And we came back the last time in March 2020. I don't know where you guys were in March 2020, but the whole world was shutting down in March 2020. We barely made it out of there. That's a whole other story. But the waves were pretty intense coming across the Drake, and they were the biggest waves I've ever seen, right? So on this little ship, you know, you go up one side of the swell, and it's like nothing but sky, and then you go down, and it's nothing but ocean. And you know, these are like crashing over the entire ship, and having a conversation with this captain, happens to be a Hawaii guy, right? It's like long-term Hawaii captain. And he's just like, you know, sitting there drinking his cup of coffee, talking about ukulele. And I said, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how is this? Because I'm hanging on for dear life, trying not to get sick. And he says, yeah, it's about a 6. So yeah, it's all a question of, it's all relative. Yes, sir.
I'm on the ag side of things.
Yeah.
You only have 2 vascular plants growing. What kind of like terrestrial taxonomy is going on? Is there like a new database and mapping for these type of things? Because what I'm getting through right now is a lot of like wings and winds, how a lot of seeds and processes make it to new places.
Yeah.
But this has, I know it has a reduced amount of availability and wings being able to make it to it, so to speak, in the same way. So are we actually like mapping out that process?
That's a great question. So there are literally only 2 vascular plants on the entire continent, and they both occur on the peninsula. It's the only place where they occur. And they've been there for a long time, as long as the mosses have been there. But on the moss side of things, there's a really well-developed flora. We know the vegetation there really well. And the moss flora of Antarctica is like that thick. And the bryophyte, which is another set of bryophytes, are called liverworts. The liverworts of Antarctica is about that thick. So hundreds and hundreds of species compared to 2. But those kinds of plants are really different, aren't they? So in terms of things that disperse in vascular plants like seeds, needing to catch a ride on birds in terms of dispersal, all the things we think about particularly in an island context, right? How did a place like Hawaii get so many plants and so many animals? You know, it had to get here and then evolve here. Here, these particular plants are different in that they do sexually reproduce, and they do create spores, and the spores can blow around. But by and large, almost every successful reproduction by a bryophyte is just by a little fragment breaking off and being carried by the wind or by water and depositing somewhere else. And so you can get a whole new plant that can grow from that fragment, and that asexual reproduction, right? It's really an asexual process. So inherently, the genetic diversity is less because there's way less sexual reproduction that's going on in these lower plants than in the higher plants. So it's really different. If you're catching a ride on a bird, it's way more straightforward if you're a bryophyte, because all you need is like a couple little pieces of that plant, you know, tips of the leaves break off, land on the feathers, bird goes somewhere else, that thing just drops on the ground, doesn't have to wait for, you know, just can start growing, doesn't even have to sexually reproduce to create a whole new patch. So I think that they expand much more quickly in that way because they have less of a limitation on dispersal than vascular plants. But vascular plants, people, we're keeping an eye on them because they're also really sensitive to climate change, right? So we wonder about how vascular plants, which are just bigger and they're stronger and they're vascular plants. What's the future for Antarctica? Is it going to get grassier is the real question. And some places have really seen expanding areas of those grasses in that way because the plants are so different. Yeah, thanks for that question. And also potential, just for one more note on that, what about invasive species? So right now there's only a couple of invasive species that happen to be bryophytes that are invasive in the sub-Antarctic islands. Most of these Antarctic areas are almost completely invasive species free. But I don't think it's going to last very long. And especially, us as scientists, we're chomping around out there, right? We try to do a good job and we try to be clean and biosecurity and making sure that all of our clothes and our shoes are all clean is a big deal. And if you go as a tourist, they're going to be all over you guys in terms of that kind of stuff, making sure that all of your equipment is clean and your shoes are clean. But life just kind of happens, right? Jurassic Park style. Invasive species are just really good at getting around. And the more people that are walking around out there, right, whether it's cities or whether it's something else, this is a place that's being more and more human affected all the time. And people are really concerned about the invasive species factor since we're so good at being that vector, right? Yes?
Just to touch bases, you said something about fungus also. Did you say anything about fungus as well?
Fungi, yeah, decomposers, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, bacteria and fungi.
Is there apparent mycelium there that connects all of these plants together? Because like in say for instance in a species of oak trees, a thicket of oak trees will use chemical warfare to talk to each other through the mycelium there.
Correct.
And if there's a subsidiary species that's not of the oak species, they'll use chemical warfare to dispatch it. Is there any relationship with actual fungi and plants? I understood there's only vascular plants, and fungi is part of that system too, right?
So that's a great question. Lots of open-ended questions there, actually, because the way that this environment has developed over time, right? The glaciers have to retreat, the land has to be exposed, and then the life has to come in. And so there's real limitations in terms of things like decomposers, fungi, bacteria. The number of species tends to be way less. And they also tend to be kind of not the usual ones that you get further north, like across the Drake Passage, you're up into South America, right? You're talking about Chile and Argentina and places like that. So those types of organisms, fungi, bacteria, have to get there. And then in terms of those relationships you're talking about with vascular plants, then that might follow vascular plants because they're making that underground network. Mosses don't make roots. So there's no roots on a moss. They have certain structures that kind of cling to rocks, but it's not vascularized and it's not doing the same things as roots are. So that kind of dynamic you're talking about between fungi and vascular plants requires that root system. So that's something to look for in those places where the grasses are starting to expand, yeah. Yeah, and I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. One thing that's exciting with the DNA work is that you can do just kind of like scattershot sampling and just see what is there in general. You can have targeted hypotheses. We always like to have research questions and hypotheses in science, but sometimes you're just getting a feel for what's there. And the DNA work down through the soil profile will give us a sense of how those microbes might have changed over time, right? They all get there at once? Are they arriving one at a time? Are there big pulses of arrival and changes that happen? Is it punctuated or is it like a linear, smooth thing? Yeah.
Outside factors, basically.
Yeah, all kinds of things to learn still, for sure, especially with the microbes. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for the presentation, Dave. So, for students that might be interested in research or in Antarctica, what do you think are the next steps that they can do to get involved?
That's a great question. If you guys will indulge me, I have a couple more slides that talk about our program. So if we move on from science talk, one of the reasons why I'm here is to get you guys to all come to UH Manoa. So as department chair in geography and environment, I'm here to try to motivate or explain to you what might be available to you guys. Antarctic research is just one thing, you know, big planet, lots of problems. We're problem solvers. So what would a geography program look like for you guys? Anybody, who's taken a geography class? Yeah, who's taken physical geography, Geography 101? Yeah, so mostly human geography, right? Guys taking human geography classes? But here there's Geography 101, 101 Lab, Geography 102, Geography 151. These are important classes for you guys, but they're also important for us, right? So geography is this discipline. It's the original interdisciplinary discipline, right? So we have three kind of sides to what we do in geography. We do physical science, like all that stuff, isotopes and cores and plants and waters. That's you know, global environmental change in terms of understanding the physical geography side of things. But then there's all of the social stuff, right, in terms of non-quantitative methods and understanding how people work. Antarctica is like the one place that doesn't have an indigenous population, right? It's unique that way. But can't say that about anywhere else really on planet Earth other than Antarctica. So using human geography to understand, you know, things that are human related, trying to understand the human side of it is important for geography as well. And then this guy is important. So geospatial information science. These are computer tools to understand geospatial patterns. And no matter what you guys do, I don't care what you guys end up doing, and do all kinds of stuff, wonderful things with your lives. If you understand how to use a GIS and understand a way to study geospatial patterns, it don't really matter what you're doing. This is like a really powerful tool to use. You know, even if you end up selling real estate in Hawaii, this is like something that's really important to understand those geographic relationships. So these three sides, you know, the environmental science side, the human geography side, and the GIS is what geography is all about. And I hope that this last line, I've already convinced you, you know, thinking about stuff going from global to local is kind of our bread and butter in geography, and giving that well-rounded education. So what do you do? You guys take 3 classes here. You can take 101, 102, 151. If you get all 3 of those classes, or maybe even more, in the bag while you're here getting your credentials, you're a third of the way through our program. You know, you're more than 30% of the way of getting a major in geography. It's a 31 credit program. So once you have that foundation, there they are at the top. All those classes are here at LCC. You can start taking some of these 300 level and 400 level courses and kind of choose a stream, right? Maybe you're into human geography, that's awesome. Maybe you're into environmental geography, that's great. Maybe you want to think about GIS and geospatial information science as a focus. You can do that as you go through a geography degree after you finish here at UH Manoa. You know, you're already a third of the way through it in terms of the major. Thank you for that question. Bruce.
If it's all right, we just go back to Antarctica for a bit?
Yeah, anytime, yeah, let's go. I'm half there all the time anyway.
I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what it's like on the ground there, the time of year that you went, how much sunlight you experienced, how warm, cold it was.
Yeah, great question. We take a ship, right? So we fly down to South America, southern tip of Chile in this case, Punta Arenas, Chile. I think you'll probably go through Ushuaia or even fly somewhere else. Yeah. So we go down to the southern tip. US Antarctic program used to come out of Argentina, now it comes out of Chile, goes back and forth. But then we get on that research vessel and we go across the Drake Passage. Takes about 3 days. And for a terrestrial guy like me, you know, I've been studying forests and trees and soils and waters for a long time. I get to play oceanographer, which is amazing. So take like a 3-day trip. The whole cycle takes about 5 weeks. So you go down on the ship, they take down new supplies to a research station called Palmer Station and resupply the station with food and everything that they need for the next round of science. Pick up all of their trash, don't leave anything behind in Antarctica, all of their trash, all their waste, their last round of researchers, and bring them back up again. And that's like a 5 or 6 week rotation. So we go down and spend 5 weeks on the ice. So for us as terrestrial ecologists, typically you get to just go down to Palmer Station and go around that area, which is beautiful and amazing. But we wrote this proposal to study a wider area in Antarctica. Let me go back to my Antarctic map. A wider area here. Palmer Station is kind of stuck right there, but we went to all these other places. And so what we do is, on a typical day, it's in the summertime down there, so we go down like December, right? Because it's austral summer, so we leave in December and we stay through maybe January, February, March. That's summer down on the ice, other side of the world. So day length is anywhere, we're not too far south, right? So, Antarctic Circle is at 66.5 degrees. So we're in like the daylight, nighttime switching back and forth kind of part of it. We don't get 24-hour sunlight. We do get days and nights. And we get from the ship, we wake up in the morning and we would get on into the rubber boats, and the Zodiacs take us to a site on land. We would spend as much time doing our research at that site as we could before we got back on the big ship, and either spend one night moored off of that area, visit for another day, or typically we just went off to another site. In 2020, it was a while ago that we were there, right? You can't go all the time. I'm trying to get back, hopefully get back in the next couple of years. But in 2020, before COVID hit, everything was fine when we left. In that year down on the ice, it was particularly warm and particularly sunny, even though my time-lapse video wouldn't suggest that. And so we had almost no bad days. Typically down there, it's like 50-50, right? You get like one good day for every just terrible day that you can't even go outside because the snow is flying and it's really, really windy. We lucked out with almost no weather days. It was just a wonderful field season in that way. So what do? To get on the little rubber boats, you have to go on the Jacob's ladder. They throw this rickety rope ladder off the side of the boat, and you go down like 2 stories on this little rope ladder, and you jump into a dinghy at the bottom. And you're this little tiny rubber speck beside this relatively large oceanographic going ship. And the first day that we were out, here's a story for you guys. I really like stories about this kind of stuff. We were going out to this site right here, that guy right there, which I just requested at the last minute from NSF to let us go to this site, because we were supposed to be well-behaved boys and girls and just kind of be around here. And I said, well, hey, why can't we go here and here? And they said, okay. So it was really rough that day. And it got rougher and rougher as we went along. And when you come off the dinghy, you have to bring the dinghy up to the side of the boat, and then you have to like not jump off the ladder, you have to jump onto the ladder. And the ocean is doing this, and like the distance between the dinghy and the ladder is like changing by 6 or 10 feet every swell. So I managed to like leap up and grab the rope ladder, but then something happened and there was a big lurch and I swung and I lost one footing. I lost one foot and then I lost one hand, and what happened is I ended up like hinging, right? You end up on this ladder, rope ladder, and I swung around like this and I nailed my head so hard on the side of the ship that I almost passed out. And if I hadn't, like I would have been in the water, and I don't know what would have happened. Yeah, playing oceanographer when you should be well behaved on land. Yeah.
Would you do a winter overcycle?
Oh, dude, I've been dreaming of overwintering. I'm absolutely dreaming of it. I would love to overwinter. Yeah, I've got my next proposal. I think I'm going to submit to NSF. Might relate to an overwintering trip to hang out on base at Palmer Station to overwinter for 8 months. I dream of it. It's like stuck in my head. Yeah. Yes, Marie.
You mentioned, ancient DNA.
Yes.
What about, I don't know if it's been researched here, but I know in the Arctic they've been looking at
Yes.
zombie viruses.
Zombie viruses. Right.
We've been talking about this in my class, but yeah.
Oh.
Is that, how real is that risk?
I don't know how it is as a risk, because I'm not a medical geographer or epidemiologist. But strange stuff is coming out of the permafrost. Yeah. So I'm not in a position to tell you about the risk, but they're finding really strange stuff that's kind of like, when the permafrost melts. So permafrost, I'm sure you guys have heard this in physical geography, but permafrost is ground that doesn't thaw in the summertime. And oftentimes permafrost has persisted for thousands and thousands of years, sometimes since the last glacial period. And as the world warms, we know the world is warming, we know it's warming faster in high latitudes. That permafrost is melting, it just is. And it takes a long time for it to freeze in, but once it's gone, it's kind of gone. It takes a lot of energetic input to refreeze it into permafrost again. So essentially it's a one-way trip, right? If we lose the permafrost, then for our lifetimes anyway, that permafrost is gone. The microbes wake up when the ground thaws. So there's stuff in the ground that just kind of shakes it off and gets going again. And this starts to decompose organic matter, and we get CO2 being emitted and methane being emitted as a result of those microbes. But there's also this kind of wildcard stuff about, zombie DNA and zombie viruses and things like that. There's a lot of uncertain things that are kind of going along with that process. I wouldn't let it keep you up at night, but it's true.
So Dave, you talked a lot about those research exhibitions. Is that open for students to get involved?
There's an entire project at NSF for undergraduate students to get involved in Antarctic research. So in this context, yes, the one guy who flew the drone for us was a master's student, not an undergraduate student. I didn't have any undergraduate students on this trip. It's kind of a little bit of a liability taking students all the way down to Antarctica, but there's a whole program that NSF sponsors and supports to get students, undergraduate students, right, four-year college students, experience in Antarctic in particular. But in general, at UH Manoa, what we do in our program is we're very hands-on with our students. We want students to get that experience. And in particular, as an example, the geospatial information science certificate that we offer. If you take 5 classes with us, 5 GIS classes, maybe in the future you'll have a couple of them already in the bag here at LCC. But if you take 5 geography, geospatial information science courses, you can get a certificate. Put it on your CV, be competitive for a job, hard skills kind of training. And that certificate has a practicum built into it, where students go and either work with faculty or work with people that are professionals out in industry here in Hawaii and do a 1-credit practicum that's specific to get students hands-on experience. Yeah, sadly, I had a field day planned on Friday. I had a group of undergraduate students that I was going to take in the field with the Oahu Army Natural Resources Program, the folks that help take care of the Waianaes out here. One of my favorite organizations in the state. They do so much good conservation work, boots on the ground, pulling weeds, planting native plants. They do incredible stuff. And we had to cancel because of the damage from the rains. But that's one other example. We like to get students out there and get them out in the field. My stuff is laboratory-based as well as field-based. And at UH Manoa, there's a program called the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program. And there you can get $5,000 to do your own research. Those kind of opportunities are there at UH Manoa. My 2 favorite programs, if you guys are thinking about transferring, right, come to UH. Come and check it out. The 2 greatest undergraduate programs, my favorites, are the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program. Get $5,000 to do your own research, write a proposal, see a project all the way through. It's helps you get into grad school, right? And if not grad school, being able to write that up from scratch is an incredible bit of training. And then study abroad. The study abroad program is really great at UH. And you guys can travel and do a semester abroad and get your credits back home. All right, well, thanks so much, you guys. What's that?
Do they have any BAM programs?
There's a BAM program. Yeah, we have a BAM. So a BAM program is bachelor and master's program, where you can do your last year as an undergraduate while you're doing your first year as a graduate student. And it's another accelerated program. Yeah, thanks for that question. And we have a BAM program in geography, and there's a few in the College of Social Sciences. I think most of the units now have a BAM program. But ours is 5 or 6 years old now. We've had several graduates of that program. Ours is a Plan B master's, so it can get tricky because or a Plan A master's, excuse me. We're a thesis-based master's kind of shop, so you have to still be able to write that master's thesis and produce at that level. So it's a big ask sometimes for BAM students, but we have help in place to help them along that path because it is accelerated. Yeah.
Good question. Do you guys have any for UH Manoa bachelor's and law school accelerated classes?
Yeah, you'd have to talk to the law school about that. But they definitely have programs to facilitate community college students to get into their programs too. Yeah, I'm not alone in any way coming to you guys. You know, why I'm here is that we want you guys to come to UH Manoa. And so if you're even thinking about it at all, maybe you're not thinking about it at all, that's fine. And it's not part of what you want to do. But if it's even on your radar at all to think about a 4-year bachelor's in whatever, you know, come and check us out. And we're trying to break down some of those barriers, right, between you guys graduating here and getting in there. And this is just one example in terms of that leg up that you get with the credits that you might already have. That's true in geography. There's a number of other programs just within social sciences where that's the case as well, and in law. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Thank you all for attending this talk, and thank you, Dave, for
Thank you guys. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.